Can the U.S. and the U.K. heal their rift over the Chagos Islands? A deal to hand the archipelago over to Mauritius was first cheered, but then derided by U.S. President Trump. So what's really at stake if the island's sovereignty is ceded to a nation of the global south? And is there still scope to change course? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the Chagos Islands. Well, it would be hard to find a place further afield than the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia. Located thousands of kilometers from any developed country, it hosts a highly strategic and highly secretive U.S. military base. Diego Garcia falls under the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands, a British Indian Ocean territory. But after years of legal action against the UK, Mauritius will assume control over the archipelago, something Washington has now declared unacceptable. The UK has argued the agreements in place not only abide by international law, but they also protect U.S. and UK security. Initially, the U.S. agreed, but now President Trump calls the deal an act of great stupidity. Here's a look.
The Chagos Islands might look tiny on a world map, but their future is causing geostrategic waves across the world. And to fully understand why also requires understanding their past and their geography. The Chagos archipelago is a series of about 60 small islands, Diego Garcia being the largest. They've been a British Indian Ocean territory since 1965, when they were separated from distant Mauritius as part of a condition of Mauritius's eventual independence from the UK. Native Chagosians were depopulated, moved to Mauritius, Seychelles and the UK. And the islands remained British, while Diego Garcia housed a joint UK-US base. In 2019, the International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion not in Britain's favour, one that both London and Washington realised they would lose to a binding agreement against them if they appealed. At Washington's insistence, under the Biden administration, negotiations began on a process to hand sovereignty back to Mauritius, with the UK and US retaining ongoing control over Diego Garcia.
If we did not agree this deal, the legal situation would mean that we would not be able to prevent China or any other nation setting up their own bases on the outer islands, or carrying out joint exercises near our base.
The UK would rent Diego Garcia on a 99-year lease with options to extend, at a cost of just over £100 million per year, which would allow the US to continue to operate. Those payments might seem large, but they are only 0.2% of the annual UK defence budget, and they would bring Mauritius, which flips back and forth on alignment with China, back into the fold with the West. For the US, the base on Diego Garcia is crucial infrastructure for power projection. It played key roles in the First Gulf War and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and could be used for future attacks on Iran. Bombers could approach without flying over hostile airspace, strike and return. But Donald Trump has himself changed his mind multiple times since his second term. In January 2025, he indicated he would go along with the UK's deal. 1 year later, he called it an act of great stupidity. Then in February, the US State Department said it officially supported the UK's decision. Just 1 day later, Trump was back on Truth Social, urging the UK Prime Minister not to go ahead with the deal. Ramping up tensions is the possibility that the US will strike Iran imminently, which means it would require the use of the base. But striking Iran would be in contravention of international law, and the UK would be obligated to decline US permission. To complicate matters further, many Chagosians want the ability to visit the heavily restricted islands, but don't want them handed back to Mauritius. The British Supreme Court temporarily blocked the signing of the deal briefly in mid-2025. More recently, a small group of Chagosian protesters have landed on the islands in February.
Born in Mauritius, I was born in exile. That is not my country, and I'm not Mauritian. I'm proud British Chagosian. That's my right. I'm here to take it.
Britain seems to be between a rock and a hard place, and unable to please anyone no matter which way it turns, as the small Chagos archipelago creates big geopolitical headaches for faraway powers across distant oceans.
So what now for the Chagos Islands and the US-UK relationship? Joining me to debate that and much more are from Crawley, UK, spokesperson for Chagosian Voices, Maxwell Evanor. From London, assistant coordinator of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Chagos Islands, Mike Salem. And from Washington, director of global affairs at Nest Point Associates and Republican political strategist, Tim Phillips. Thanks all so much for being with me. Tim, I'll start with you and let you begin by explaining why first President Trump has flip-flopped on this deal and why he now says it actually is a danger to the U.S. security interest to cede these islands to Mauritius.
I suspect that the administration has spoken with some of the military, American military leaders, and they have explained how Diego Garcia is such a crucial base, especially for the bombers, B-2s, B-1s, and the other large bombers, the stealth bombers. Diego Garcia is a crucial refueling and maintenance, especially on the maintenance side, without having to go all the way back to the United States or much further away. So I suspect the military detailed to the civilian leaders at the Pentagon just how important the Diego Garcia base is to any operation in Iran or, frankly, within that region of the world.
It's interesting, I mean, how that could be kind of missed in the first place until it, now that it's gotten so far, all of a sudden this flag has been raised. But, I mean, could any other base, substitute for Diego Garcia, or is this really the only location that could address the threats that the United States sees coming potentially from China and the Middle East?
The way the military looks at it, you want as many options as possible, especially when you have a base like Diego Garcia that has been such a crucial linchpin for many years for the American military. The strategic location of it, right in the center, relatively speaking, of the Indian Ocean, it's crucial for that entire theater, especially in the Middle East region where Iran is. And so, again, I'm not attempting to say this happened, but I suspect that after the initial comments from the civilian leadership, I think it was Rubio and the president himself, I suspect the military stepped in and said, hey, look, that is an important area. Starmer and Trump have a good relationship. It goes back to the trade deal they worked last year. It was one of the first big trade deals in the entire world with the new administration, Trump administration. So I suspect the civilian leadership, they wanted to be supportive of Starmer. But then I have a feeling the military stepped in here.
Okay, Mike, I mean, is that suspicion justifiable for you if it is indeed true? Because, we had Keir Starmer himself saying, if we did not agree to this deal, the legal situation would mean that we would not be able to prevent China and any other nation from setting up their own bases on the outer islands and carrying out joint exercises near our base. So how do you reconcile these two completely kind of polar opposite takes on what's secure and what's not for this base in the Chagos on Diego Garcia?
Well, good afternoon to you and to all your viewers. That's a valid point. I think Starmer is trying to show that we need legal certainty for the effective continuation of the operation of the base. And I think the previous Biden administration appreciated that, as well as the current Trump administration, which is why successive governments, both in the UK and the US, were working on resolving this and providing the legal certainty for the base. And I think the recent rift is a broader discussion on disagreements on using the base, for example, in Iran or Greenland. So I think the U-turns by Trump is not inconsistent with his willingness to provide the long-term security to the base. It is rather part of a broader geopolitical question which the UK and the US has to resolve.
Yeah. So, Mike, then what do you see unfolding here? Given years of international legal action now buttressed against this geopolitical context of today?
Well, I suspect there'll be lots of negotiations. We know that since the rift there has been negotiations by the Americans, Mauritians, and the British to reach a settlement. And I think a settlement is of the interest of all parties. The agreement provides long-term stability to the base. It's not a liability. It is a great strength and asset. And I think the Americans do appreciate that, which is why they're keen to keep the conversation going.
Okay. Tim, I can see you agree there. So, I mean,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I do. I think, again, Starmer and Trump have a good relationship. It's a good working relationship. And I think they will work this out. There's a lot at stake here, and not just Iran, but I think the long term, with the China being the key geopolitical threat for, I think, the West, certainly for the United States, just speaking for us, uh, it- the administration does feel that base is important.
Okay. Let me turn to Maxwell because you have a movement that is actually fighting for Chagosian residents' rights in the midst of this geopolitical minefield now. The courts recognized your claims, but what do you make of, I guess, the complaints that the residents removed from the islands perhaps don't fully understand the complications and the gravity of what's at stake for national security today? Do you accept that?
So, good afternoon, Andrea. Good afternoon to everyone and your viewers. The Chagosian people do recognize that the military base on Diego Garcia is in great importance, and it keeps the peace within the Middle East, especially that now there's a lot of uncertainty around the Middle East with Iran and so forth. So, but for us, the Chagosian, we were illegally removed from the Chagos Islands back in the 1960s, and we want to go home. This deal that is now being kind of stopped by the President of America, Donald Trump, we welcome the hold of the deal, because that deal actually doesn't have anything for the Chagosians. What it does, it actually make all the injustice that happened to the Chagosian legal.
Okay. Help me understand, though, Maxwell, because one of the issues that has to be dealt with is the fact that the Chagosian residents don't all speak with the same voice. So there's a very small population of displaced people here, and some of them are arguing toward different ends. But do you at least go ahead?
Yes, I mean, the Chagosian, why this is being used against us that we don't have one views, and it's like in any other state, you know, when you have a vote, no one votes for the same thing. You got different views, but because the Chagosian haven't been given a democratic way to choose what they want, they haven't been consulted at all. This is why this is used against us. But I can tell you that the majority of Chagosian people wants to go back home. They want to go to their land, and they agree with the military base.
Quickly, though, Maxwell, what is there to genuinely go home to? Because really the only development strong enough to support entire communities is on this U.S. military base where you will not be welcome. So what is to happen to a potential population moving back there if nothing is really built? There's no infrastructure.
There is a feasibility study that was done by the KPMG that says resettlement on the Chagos Islands is possible, and the best place for resettlement for Chagosian would be on the base, because the base have all the amenities, but also there's going to be jobs. But you know, when we were there on the island, we had everything. We had our way of life, we had our culture, so it can be rebuilt. We can go back and rebuild.
Okay, well, let me ask Tim then, if the claims of Chagosian residents like Maxwell complicate what the U.S. wants and what it says are very serious security issues here.
I think the United States military, I believe, and certainly the Trump administration would say this is a vital base for being able to maintain the sea lanes, the air ability in that vital and important part of the world. There is an agreement already in place that allows use of that base. And the Starmer deal would be changing an agreement already in place. And I think the Trump administration and the United States is on reasonable ground to say, hey, the agreement in place is a good one. Let's not shift to something that brings uncertainty.
Okay, but I mean,
I think that's the thought.
sure, but if the Chagosian residents have this claim to return home, what would that mean? Because, well, let's point out again that this is not just a U.S. military base, it's an incredibly secretive military base. We know for a fact that a lot of what happens there is just not for public dissemination and for good U.S. security reason. So here you have a population of people saying, we not only want to move back to the island that the base is on, but we can be employed as well by the U.S. government there. I mean, is that unrealistic?
I'm not in a position to make a determination about the being able to return there. I will just say, though, as I understand it, I've tried to study the details, which they matter in legal issues. There is an agreement in place, and so currently the standing legally of the United States and the United Kingdom would be strong in this situation.
Well, then let me ask Mike. I mean, is there a way to kind of satisfy everyone safely here without compromising security?
Yes, 100%. And let me just begin by saying what happened in the early 70s was a great injustice for the Chagosians, and the APPG has been continuously campaigning over the last 20 years in its 99+ meetings in initially advocating for the resettlement of Chagosians back on the islands. Realistically, Diego Garcia is needed for military purposes, but the outer islands are not. So that's a viable option for Chagosians to resettle into, and they should have every right. And we've always campaigned for their right to resettle and return. And during the feasibility study that was mentioned by KPMG, the Americans did not rule out the Chagosians living on base. Of course, they will have to use the American resources there, and that's a separate question for security and intelligence community to work out. But fundamentally, I think the agreement does ensure that Mauritius has an obligation to provide that right to return for the Mauritians, for the Chagosians, something that we, as the United Kingdom, failed to do for so long.
Okay, Maxwell, why do you disagree there?
The treaty says that Mauritius is free to resettle Chagosian, and the Mauritian government hasn't provided any plans for resettlement. We, as Chagosian Voices, have been working with an architect in France, and we've actually got plan of houses to go on Diego Garcia, but there's nothing that is come from the Mauritian government. And we'll be honest with you, the Chagosian do not trust the Mauritian government. We were dumped in Mauritius, and we grew in Mauritius. I came to the UK when I was 20 years old, and I can tell you that we had a very, very, very hard time in Mauritius.
Okay, Mike, you look skeptical for some reason. What surprised you there?
I'm very sorry to hear that. Of course, no Chagosian should be mistreated because of their heritage. I think the solution is for all Chagosian communities to unite together and actually work together in having their voices heard. And I genuinely believe that this agreement will place legal responsibility, international responsibility on Mauritius to commit to resettling Chagosians and taking it far more seriously. And they have assured us with that commitment. And there are different Chagosians groups with different views, and I very much appreciate that. So I think the real answer is for all these community leaders to come in together and work and have their voice represented, because, united they stand and divided they fall.
Tim, let me ask you this then on a separate topic. I mean, what kind of trust does the United States have or not have in the Mauritian government to manage the position it will be left in if it takes over the Chagos Islands as per the plan, to be in the center of this major kind of geopolitical back and forth between what equates to actual superpowers? Does the U.S. trust Mauritius to in the U.S.'s opinion, do right by the United States and therefore by the West?
The relationship that the United States has with the United Kingdom is a close, long-standing relationship through many wars, through many conflicts, through decades of turmoil. The United States just does not have that relationship uh, uh, with the Mauritians, and so I do not think the trust level is there. Candidly, I do not. Certainly not at the level that is with the UK and the United States. The UK and the United States militaries have a long-standing, close, almost symbiotic relationship in many regards, with certainly with an operational tempo, et cetera. We've been through many conflicts together around the world. And so there's just not that level of trust. And I think the uncertainty, given the vital nature of that base at Diego Garcia, in such a crucial strategic part of the world, it does make it difficult.
Okay, Mike, given that lack of trust that Tim just described, I mean, is it too late for the UK to change course, in effect? We also have to remember, some have pointed out that Mauritius is part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So technically, it could go forward and ban US and UK nuclear weaponry, including submarines, if it deems that it's in violation of the treaty that it signed up to, that the US did not.
So I think Tim is right that the Mauritians don't have as good of a relationship with the Americans as the British do. I mean, the British and American relationship, we call it a special relationship because they've been together for so long. But I think through proxies, Mauritius is a great ally of the West. It's a member of the Francophone as well as the Commonwealth. We value the trust that we have between the Mauritians and the UK. And Mauritius is one of the very few countries in Africa, if not, I think, one of the 2 countries in Africa that has not signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative with China. Mauritius does want to be allies with the West, and I think this agreement provides the opportunity for Mauritius to bind itself with the West for the next 99 years and avoid having to do deals with China. So I very much stress that this agreement is not a liability. It is very much a strength from the international law perspective, from diplomatic channels and defense and security.
Maxwell, do you have an opinion on that, given that you don't want to see the Chagos Islands handed back to Mauritius? I mean, do you at least... Go ahead.
Chagosian Voice's position is that we are against the deal, but we should also remember that very recently there is a committee from the UN served on the elimination of discrimination against race that says that the UK and Mauritius should stop the ratification and consult the Chagosians. So we need to be consulted. We need to be at the table. And as we said, Chagosian are not against the military base. We are not a threat to the military base. We are not a threat to the security of the military base. And actually, us Chagosians has given our culture, given our life to the security of the world. Our land has been taken away from us for peace in the world. We just want to have a bit of recognition and also be able to go home to leave the peace as well.
Okay. Maxwell, quickly, I'm going to have to just address something that, a number of people have brought up about the case from the very beginning of Chagosian residents. They don't want to say that you are indigenous residents of the Chagosian Islands, that you were brought there by the same colonial powers that later took you to the UK, Mauritius, Seychelles, wherever you were displaced. What do you make of that argument that nobody has the right to say they should be there indigenously?
No, so the argument here is the fiction that the UK government created back in the 1965 to say that there was no permanent population on the Chagos Island. Actually, the UK is in admittance to that fiction. And the aim of the fiction was to create a floating population. So at the moment, as you see, Chagosian don't have a land. We are basically a floating population. This is why the fiction was created. And that deal is being done on that fiction, which is why I said this deal is making the injustice of the Chagosians legal.
Okay. Mike, are you on the same page there?
Well, I very much agree that the initial myth by the UK government in 1965 played a role in the original justification in forcibly removing Chagosians off the island. And I think to address that great injustice, the ICJ reached its ruling in 2019, showing that the islands must be returned to Mauritius, and not only that, but when voted in the UN by the UN General Assembly, 150 so countries voted in favor, and only 6 countries voted against the proposal at the time, UK being one of them and Australia the other. So the agreement does help resolve all these injustices, and it is a strength. And I urge the Chagosian communities not to walk away from that, but actually joining and being part of the conversation, because that's what we need to do to ensure that we balance all these different stakeholders.
Mike, that will unfortunately have to be the final word. We are completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers, so I'd really like to thank all 3 of my panelists so much for being with me, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.